Whenever I post speed paints, I have a lot of people questioning my method of drawing faces, which differs from the typical Loomis method. And while I don't feel entirely confident diving into a full video regarding how I draw heads and faces right now, I figured I'd make a video showcasing some of my studies and how I go about them. This video will not be a full tutorial per se, but an exploration of the concepts I use to draw heads and how I implement planes of the face into my art while showcasing different examples of studies I do. I still feel like my faces could use more structure and I could improve my methods of drawing them, so I figured it would be fitting to make a video showing how I go about trying to improve that. But with that being said, let's just get into the general concepts. If you've watched Arcane at all, you'll generally know what planes of the face are, or at least know what they look like. The faces in the show are pretty defined, one of the most standout features of the style being the defined noses. You can really see the top and sides of the nose compared to, say, most other anime styles. The best way I can describe planes of the face in the Asaro Head in general is kind of like a 3D way of picturing the head. In fact, if you look up the Asaro Head, you'll see a lot of 3D models of the head, which looks almost low poly in the way it's broken down. Using the head, it's a lot easier to picture the head as a 3D object with protrusions and indentations rather than just a flat 2D drawing. But what are planes and how do they help with this? The best way to explain planes is what I learned from my professor in a life drawing class. So run your hand flat over your arm, slowly moving it across the side of it. Eventually your hand will have to turn. Each time your hand must turn marks a new plane, separating the top of your arm from the side of your arm. This kind of explains why some people will draw arms as boxes, since at its most simplistic, the arm has 4 planes: top, bottom, left, and right sides. A lot of the body can be simplified into these 4 planes, which is why people will also draw the body as boxes, including the head. But the Asaro Head seeks to further define these planes since the head itself is incredibly complex. Now, running your hand over your face, you can feel the distinction between your cheeks and cheekbone, and see how your eye socket is recessed into your head compared to the bone of your brow. The planes on the Asaro Head represent these nuances, defining different changes in direction, similar to the arm example I just showed you. That might not make a lot of sense since it can be a complicated subject to grasp, but looking at examples of how light affects the Asaro Head can really illustrate this. You can see how when light is coming from the top of the head, the eyes are cast in shadow because the brow bone protrudes from the head. Or how, from the side, the nose can cast a shadow on the other side of the face because it too protrudes from the face. I sometimes use the app Handy to mess around with lighting and how it affects the planes of the face, but you can find other examples online too. I'll link below a lighting reference of the Asaro Head you can use for free on ArtStation. But hopefully with that explanation you can have a better idea of what the Asaro Head and what planes of the faces mean, since the Asaro Head is basically just the head broken down into planes of the face. I enjoy thinking about the head this way the most, not only because it helps a lot when figuring out lighting and shading, but also because I find it far more useful to think of the head like a 3D object rather than just some lines on paper. Learning to think about things in a 3D way will help a lot, not only when it comes to drawing things from different angles, but also making faces feel more alive and like they actually have mass. I'll also explain how this method of constructing faces can be extremely versatile, but for that we'll need to move on to studies. So the Asaro Head can be broken down in different ways. Just looking online you'll find a variety of different ones, some more complex and some more simplified with less or more planes. It's helpful to study the head at its most simplified and its most complicated. If you want to start understanding the Asaro Head, I'd recommend just starting with the most simple and then growing to more complex and seeing how the difference in how it's broken down. When I draw the Asaro Head, I kind of focus on the landmarks of the face and then get into the smaller details. So usually I'll draw the overall shape of the head and then usually define the cheekbones, what separates the cheek from the cheekbone. Then after that, usually I'll draw the nose because even when making expressions, the nose really doesn't move that much, so it's a great landmark to have. And then just working on drawing the eye sockets, which helps me figure out the eyes, and then since I have the nose and the bottom of the chin, I can figure out where the mouth generally is. And while I won't be covering the Loomis method, learning it definitely helps when getting the basic proportions right, or a general idea of where the proportions will be, which I would definitely recommend before diving into this. I mean, the reason I chose the Asaro head is because I used the Loomis head for a while and I didn't really like how it was broken down. I felt like it was kind of limiting. I mean, the Loomis head is meant to be changed according to the proportions of the face, but it still felt limiting, especially when going to more stylized stuff. And also it just limited me in thinking of the head as a 3D object. So honestly, I think it was good that I started with that and then I moved on to learning the Asaro head and applying my knowledge of proportion from the Loomis head onto this. But yeah, honestly, like when people ask how to study the Asaro head, it's kind of just copying it down. You want to copy the head down just to get used to constructing the head and getting used to breaking it down according to the planes of the face. So honestly, you can find out your own way of breaking down the Asaro head. It's kind of not like the Loomis method where there's like a step-by-step guide I could give you, but you just kind of want to get used to how people generally break down the face. When I do studies of real life references, what I first do is gather resources. And a lot of these come from Pinterest, but sometimes with Pinterest, you can struggle to find different angles of the head or people that are not conventionally attractive. A lot of times they'll be just like models on Pinterest. So I often go to Earthsworld for references of a variety of people. And if you didn't know, Earthsworld, they have a website and Instagram. I believe they have a Twitter where they take photos of people from fairs. So it's a great resource for drawing people who aren't models and just people you'd see in your everyday life. And this resource for me was really great when it came to drawing old people. I got a lot of good practice when it came to that by using Earthsworld references. And speaking of older people, it can help to draw older people and people with more defined faces because often they can give you a better idea of what the structure of the face is like. Think of it kind of similar to how artists usually draw muscular people when drawing anatomy because the muscles are more visible and defined. I like drawing older people because you can usually see landmarks of the face much more easily than people with, say, fuller cheeks that obstruct the cheekbone or those who lack any wrinkles whatsoever. Now, of course, I draw these people too, but if you really want to push yourself, it would definitely help to draw older people and people with defined faces, because that's what will really help you figure out what the structure of the face is like beneath the fat and skin. Line of Action also has an expression section where you can find people making more extreme facial expressions. That one's also very useful if you want to look for different face references. Similar to what I spoke of when breaking down the Asaro head, I start with the general shape of the face and then kind of sculpt it using my knowledge of the planes of the face. And when I'm struggling with a study, what I often do is import the photo for me to draw on top of. Often when looking at a reference, it can be difficult to determine the exact proportions because of how color, lighting, and all the minor details can get in the way of proper observation. So what I do is cut out all the noise by drawing on top of the reference, allowing me to see the exact proportions and determine what I got wrong in the original study. Think of it like a teacher with a red pen. By doing the study, then figuring out where I went wrong, I can adjust the original and learn through my mistakes. Honestly, the best way to learn is often through trial and error. Sometimes people can simply struggle to learn anything from studies because they never check their work, since it really is the case that most learning comes from mistakes. Even if every study isn't perfect, you can learn your errors and apply it to the next study. Personally, I know I tend to make noses too long, so whenever I do studies or draw, I keep an eye out for that habit of mine, and that's something I learned I do because I've done studies and looked at the exact proportions. Now, it might be more useful for you to keep your guidelines or have them visible on another layer. A lot of times I just end up erasing some of them due to habit and wanting to see if my proportions are okay by only seeing the facial features. I also just kind of tend to draw like that because I find my sketches look better when I keep my sketch on one layer and just refine it further and further. But again, this is just personal preference. Study however works best for you. I kind of find it like how sometimes people struggle with line art and they lose a lot of the charm when they go from sketch to line art, so they just refine their sketch. I just go from my really rough sketch to my defined sketch by just keeping it on one layer and just erasing it through. So yeah, do whatever works best for you. Honestly, if you're starting out, it might be best to just have a separate layer with your guidelines so you can go back and reference it later on. And even though I've studied the planes of the face and done face studies plenty of times, I still find new ways to go about constructing them. In this session, I was practicing finding ways to place the eyes and making it more accurate. And while normally I just draw a general triangle for the eye socket, I was also practicing making this more defined and drawing more planes in the eye socket just so I could get a better idea of where the eye would be. And when you study, don't be afraid to try new things and try breaking the face down in different ways. You can study even just by importing photos of heads and drawing on top of them, which I think helps me as well. Honestly, if you're first starting learning the planes of the face, what might help is having the Asaro Head as a reference on the side and taking in photos of people and just drawing the Asaro Head on top of it, like breaking down the faces into the planes of the face. And then you could do studies like freehanding it, not tracing it directly. That would probably be a good place to start. If you're intimidated by the Asaro Head and really don't know what you're doing, that could be a great exercise for you to do. Now, I also do a lot of traditional art studies, and I wanted to show some examples of that because not only is drawing with pen and paper really just beneficial in the first place, but in this case, I think it really helps with my line confidence too. So I usually draw with a ballpoint pen and the Pilot Precise V7, but if you just have an ink pen like this, it could work with anything. If you're just starting out drawing with pen, I'd recommend using a ballpoint pen first. You can control the pen pressure similar to a pencil a lot more, but you still aren't able to erase, which is the important thing. Taking away the ability to erase makes you think longer and harder about each line, being more deliberate in your strokes and forcing you to have confidence in each line you place. When I study, I try not to chicken scratch, which ink pen is especially great at preventing. So for my head studies, as you can see, I use the ballpoint pen to draw my guidelines like I do digitally, and then drawing on top of it with this ink pen. And this, honestly, I really like how it looks, especially if you used a colored ballpoint pen, because you can kind of have that separation of the actual features while still being able to see your guidelines. So I really like how it looks, honestly, more than my digital. Normally when I do a bad study, I just move on, but for this video, and if I really want to fix it, I just add a sticky note on top of it and redraw the part I dislike. But really what you want to do for all studies and what the purpose of drawing in pen is for is to learn to make a mistake and then move on rather than endlessly tweaking a single piece. So I'd highly recommend doing some pen studies. It really teaches you a lot of lessons about line confidence and overcoming perfectionism. When people compliment my line confidence, I can definitively say that this is the reason I was able to build those skills. And if you're wondering, this sketchbook is just a cheap one I got from Target. I really prefer super cheap sketchbooks, so I don't feel any pressure when drawing in them. And these ones are like definitely not the best quality because I swear they always like get broken down the longer I use them. All of mine, the pages have separated from the spine, but I just really think having a cheap one with just a lot of pages is better for me when having these like anatomy study books because I feel no pressure drawing in them, and I'm only really using like pen in them, so it really doesn't matter the quality of the paper for me. And I think when you're getting into studies, you kind of want to have a sketchbook like that and have that mindset where you aren't too precious about them. Because honestly, being too precious and spending too much time on studies will make you hate it. And I've kind of conditioned myself to really like studies and find them relaxing. So I feel like that's what you should want to achieve. So really don't put too much pressure on studies. Just focus on learning, focus on making mistakes and getting better. And they don't have to be the prettiest things in the world. I know some of these aren't. Now, I also wanted to introduce other method of study I do, which is studying styles I like, because you don't always have to study real life. It's definitely helpful and preferred to study real life, but you also learn a lot just from studying other people's styles. I like studying Arcane and especially Spider-Verse to see how they stylize anatomy, kind of taking apart their styles and trying to figure out how the artist stylizes their anatomy. What I like about Spider-Verse is the different face shapes they use. It helps me try to figure out different basic shapes for heads and then adding planes to make it more complex. Like you can see, I chose Uncle Aaron for this example because he has a very long stylized face that still looks pretty realistic because it feels so 3D. I struggled a lot making it look right, but breaking down the screenshot really helped me figure out how to make this long rectangle into a face by sculpting out the face planes. And if you wanted to take some stills from Spider-Verse, I'll leave a link below of someone who compiled tons and tons of screenshots into a Google Drive folder of Spider-Verse. So I use it sometimes to study anatomy or study faces. I would definitely go in and maybe give that a shot if you want to learn how to study planes of the face, because Spider-Verse also uses it a lot. But yeah, honestly, studying like this makes me feel like a sculptor. It's really enjoyable for me, and it's kind of like taking a basic shape and then just molding it to look like a human face using the planes of the face. I also wanted to talk about Ben Eblin, I believe is how you say it. I probably said that wrong, but he's an artist who introduced me to this method of drawing faces and has a great video I'd highly recommend, which I'll link below. He has a very stylized, cartoony art style, but he still uses construction and planes of the face to make them feel 3D and fully realized. I really enjoy seeing how he breaks down these super stylized faces, so he's another artist I find it super helpful to study from. And definitely give his video a watch if you want a better, more professional explanation of this, and he goes a lot in depth about it. But with that, that's basically what I have to say about how I study faces. This video is kind of different from my usual stuff because it's more so just me talking about how I study faces and just talking over my process and showing some examples. I didn't get as specific or technical as my other tutorial videos, so hopefully you guys still find this useful. Definitely leave your thoughts down below, and if you like this style of video. Originally, it didn't have like a script at all, but I was like rambling too much, which is why like my voice is a little dead right now. But yeah, I just went back and made it a bit more structured just so I could be a little more clear and not repeat the same things over and over again. I also just wanted to say that I know some of you saw that my channel got hacked not too long ago. I wanted to thank everyone who reached out to me and let me know that was happening, as well as just sent kind words about my channel and said that it had helped them with stuff or inspired them. And I'm really glad to hear that, because that's the whole point of why I make tutorials. I don't really think that my art is the best, not at all. I'm not like a professor of art. I'm just someone who went to school and figured out what works best for my brain. And I feel like a lot of art channels, a lot of them kind of say the same things, I guess, or only explain things in a certain way. So my goal with my videos is just to kind of give a new perspective of how to do things, because I know a lot of people feel trapped in the Loomis method, but you don't have to do that in order to be a successful artist. I think it's a great thing to learn, but this is the method that works best for me and helped improve my art. And if that helps you, then that's great, and I'm glad. And if it doesn't, then you can always try out a different method of drawing heads and figure out what works best for you. Of course, it's not a one-size-fits-all, but that's my process of drawing heads, of studying. Hopefully that helped, and yeah, that's all I had to say. Bye!